Hello, my name is Zinnia Balkan, and this is my video midterm response. There's been many articles so far presented to us in this class, but one specifically stood out to me, and that is Melissa Ames, Engaging Apolitical Adolescents, Analyzing the Popularity and Educational Potential of Dystopian Literature Post 9/11. This was published in the High School Journal, Volume 97, Number 1, Fall 2013, and this article is found on pages 3 through 20. And what this really is saying, there's an argument that students right now are not political, when in reality, especially now, it seems like we are, especially we're becoming more and more political. And one of the arguments is that we are becoming political through dystopian literature because we are able to analyze our current events. There's one quote in particular that I think really summarized this article and what it was trying to get across, at least in the way that I interpreted it. And that can be found on page 5. The quote is as follows: "These kinds of texts mirror and criticize reality, forcing readers to consider reality ironically at the same time they are escaping from it. Such narratives play upon deep, unresolved fears from reality, exaggerating and sometimes solving them in fictional scenarios. In this case of young adult dystopia, it is the young people, willing or not, who must confront these fears and ultimately solve the problems that spawn them." In so much of our current events are really scary, and if as being a teacher right now, they can feel really hard to discuss. And that's where dystopian literature can come into play and be used as a tool to help teachers talk about bigger issues in the safe confines of fiction, even though it may directly relate to nonfiction issues that children may be facing in your own classroom today. An example I would like to give is using The Partials, a book by, I believe, Dan Wells. Let's see. Yep, Dan Wells. And Partials was published by HarperCollins publishers in 2013. This book, there is a virus going around, which is a great correlation between COVID-19. And this virus kills many people. And one way that they talk about it too is there's ways to talk about grieving in the partials and how to remember family members and honor them, even if your memories are distant. And that may be a good example to use in terms of grieving, because even if a child hasn't directly lost someone from COVID-19, there is a huge loss within our country of many people who have died from COVID-19. And you hear it on the news, you hear it on the radio, your parents are talking about it. It's not a conversation that's easy to have, but as a child, you still may be aware of what is going on. So using The Partials as a book to talk about grieving and how to honor people's memories is a great way to talk about heavy issues like that. For example, there's an excerpt in The Partials that is found on page 154 in Partials, and it is as follows. "Why'd you join?" Kira asked. "Why not become a vet or a rancher or whatever?" "Because my mother was a soldier," said Yoon, shrugging. This is a short excerpt, but it's just talking about how this young soldier is honoring her mother by becoming a soldier like her. Even though she doesn't have great memories of her mom, she can still relate to her life and feel connected to her in that way, which is a good example of healthy grieving and honoring someone's memory. Another example in terms of current events is The Giver is a dystopian novel. The Giver was written by Lois Lowry, and that was published by Laurel-Leaf Books in 1993. And The Giver, it's all about memory and even painful memories. So, for example, this past year, a lot of talk with Black Lives Matter and riots and social injustice. And to understand um, racial injustice and racism within our country, you do need to understand the history to have some exposition on the subject. And that is really hard to talk about. It's a heavy history that our country carries in terms of slavery, racial oppression, segregation, mass incarceration. The list goes on and on with the racial injustice that our country has faced and is still facing. Um, and Lois Lowry describes history as a burden to carry. And Jonas is the protagonist who takes on these memories of the society that otherwise the society is wiped clean. So he is the only one besides the giver who has these memories. And memory and history can feel like a burden a lot of times. And it's something heavy to carry about what has happened in our country in the past and how that still affects us today. And using that type of dystopian literature, even though it isn't a fictional world, it does directly relate to our world. So using this type of literature can make the issue, although it's big and scary and heavy, such as the racial injustice and unrest that our country faces, it is easier to talk about in this small confine of fiction. And there's plenty of examples that you can use with dystopian literature, but those two really stuck out in my mind was Partials by Dan Wells and The Giver by Lois Lowry, just because those are books that I personally have read and they made a connection in my own life. In my own classroom, I would love to use books that students can relate to and become interested in. And I would love just to have that connection because that's where learning happens. After reading Melissa Ames, it changed my perspective of dystopian literature. I've always seen it as a fun genre that is more for enjoyment and not as much for education, but my mindset has completely changed on that.